Hi everyone, this mini lecture is about peer review. Let me say first of all, I apologize for the sound quality if it sounds a little weird. I'm trying to get the microphone as close to my mouth as I can so that you can actually hear me this time. Anyway, with that out of the way, peer review is a term that you hear a lot in writing courses and even in courses that are outside of the writing program, that may be writing intensive courses in your majors. It's a term that covers a really wide variety of activities. It may be everything from an activity that you might do in small groups pretty early in a writing assignment, in which you are brainstorming ideas about what to write, about arguments you might want to make, about topics you might want to cover, and you're doing it in a group setting. Just brainstorming is really the term that we might otherwise use for that. But peer review might also cover, on the other end of a writing assignment, last stage editing activities that you might do, again with a small group. Peer review might also cover an activity in which one person is sharing a piece of writing that he or she has done with the entire class. That's a pretty common activity in creative writing workshops, but it's also adapted in a variety of other courses. So peer review can mean a lot of different things. Generally, in a writing course, what most people mean when they say peer review is small group work, maybe pairs or 3 or 4 people, focusing on a pretty intermediate or late stage draft that is getting close to finished but maybe still has some work to be done. And that's what you are doing with peer review for this literacy report assignment. So what you see here on the screen is a handout that I'm going to post to Canvas about what I'm calling effective and ethical peer review. And I hope I'm able to convey to you what I mean by effective and ethical. The effective part is probably self-explanatory. The ethical part may take a little bit of explanation, and I'll get to that in just a minute. Writing, as you see here on the handout, is a social activity. You already know that. We've talked about that in several different ways. Where that really becomes important in a classroom setting is when you're asked to do peer review, and that's where the rubber really hits the road. We can talk all day about how writing is a social activity, but it becomes a bit socially risky when you are not just submitting your writing to an instructor or a professor, but you're actually submitting writing that you're doing to your peers, to people who are in the class, because one of two things might happen. On the one hand, your writing may be read by someone who doesn't know you very well, and that person may not want to offend you, may not want to make judgments about your writing, and so that may mean that the peer review you get from that person isn't going to be very high quality because it may be very superficial. On the other hand, the person who is reading your writing may be a friend of yours, may be someone who does know you, and the same thing may happen. That person may not want to make comments that you might take offense at. What we all need to try to do, both as reviewers and as people who are receiving review comments from someone else, is get past that and to realize that comments about writing in a peer review situation should be directed to the writing itself and not to the person who's doing the writing. So we need to get past the tendency to take comments about our writing personally. A lot of us grew up with the idea that when we're writing something, we do it in one shot and we are really, really married to whatever it is we wrote down, that we get it all together in our heads before we write it down. And so by the time we're writing it down on a page, we've really committed to it. But we need to get past that idea. You're going to do so much writing, you really need to get into, I would advise, that you get into a rhythm, a practice of writing in which you're actually writing a lot. You may be writing stuff that never sees the light of day, but the more you do that, the more you engage in really low-risk writing activities, the less personally you will take critical comments. It's something that I still deal with myself. When I get comments back from an editor of a journal to which I've submitted some work, sometimes it takes me a while to be able to open that envelope or open that email message and actually read the comments, and I get kind of prickly about it, but it's an ongoing activity, but I have to get over it, and I suggest you do as well. So here's some practical advice. When you're commenting on a draft, the first thing to understand is that you need to know who your peers' target readership is. It's probably not you. You're one of the people who's reading it, obviously, but the person who wrote it may not have written it with you in mind. So you kind of have to play. You have to play a role. Okay. Imagine yourself in the role of the person the writer you're reading, imagine yourself in the role of that person's audience, and that may mean that you have to ask some critical questions about that. Okay, ask the person, who is your audience? Who do you imagine this person to be? And then take on that role and to respond out of that role. Try to balance praise and criticism, right? So any piece of writing is going to be imperfect. Any piece of writing is going to have stuff going on that is really working well and other stuff going on that doesn't work so well. So you need to be prepared to respond to stuff that's praiseworthy and stuff that needs some constructive criticism. Whatever you're doing, whether you're praising or criticizing, make sure you see this in bold right here. This is very important. Make your comments specific and substantive. Don't just put a smiley face or write yes or no or great or whatever. Here are a couple of examples. These are very clear comments. I think this could flow better. Could you use a transition word? It seems like you're going on to clarify your point. So, provide some specific suggestions. Don't just leave it at fix this, right? Or what a lot of teachers sometimes do is just write awkward in the margin, and that's just not helpful. So don't do what those teachers do, okay? Ask for clarification whenever you feel like it's necessary. This is one of the reasons I really like to do peer review in class, when you're actually not just looking at the paper itself, but you actually have an opportunity to be face-to-face with the person who wrote it. So try to ask. The best peer review sessions should, as I wrote here, really feel like conversations rather than one-way critiques where you're telling the person everything that's wrong or even right. It should be a back and forth. And then one last point I'll make, it's pretty typical for a lot of people, especially who are not used to doing peer review, to giving comments to a peer, to focus on grammar rather than other considerations. The problem with doing that is, unless what's going on grammatically really gets in your way of understanding what you're reading overall, it may be, to use a cliche, putting the cart before the horse, to look a lot at grammar. If you spend a whole lot of time commenting on the sentence level grammar, the punctuation, the spelling in a paragraph as you are reading in a peer review activity, only to discover later on that you may advise the person to cut that paragraph out altogether because it just doesn't fit with the rest of the piece of writing, you will have spun your wheels. You will have spent a lot of time fixing the grammar of that paragraph when you may not have needed to do that at all. So try to work from higher level concerns like, is there good cohesion from paragraph to paragraph? Is there a clear thesis that I can understand? Is there good evidence throughout the piece of writing? Try to focus on those considerations first, and then later on, if you have another opportunity, then maybe spend some time focusing on grammar, but only do that after a while. It's not to say that you shouldn't ever focus on grammar, it's just that you need to prioritize it, okay? When you are receiving comments, I already said this, accept comments as directed to your writing. Don't take them personally. The second point, be open to suggestions, but understand you don't have to accept them. Right? Even in a situation like mine I described to you, sometimes I get comments from journal editors. They'll make all kinds of comments, or the people who are reading them, peers in the field, will make all kinds of comments about what I should do, but I don't always take all of them because maybe they're telling me something and it means that they didn't understand what I was trying to do, and so I'll take some advice and not other advice. Right? So learn to prioritize really good advice and learn to set aside advice that may not be totally relevant. And then a last point, note consistent difficulties your readers have. If you notice that multiple people reading your writing seem to make the same kinds of comments, if there's a pattern to their comments, that suggests that you should pay attention to that. You should keep a log. You should try to include that kind of feedback in your writing process for subsequent assignments. So if someone's noticing a problem with cohesion, for example, well, and if that's a consistent thing that people are noticing, then you know for future assignments you need to pay attention to cohesion, right? So let's look at a quick example. This is a draft of a summary that a student wrote, this has been a couple of semesters ago, and I made comments here trying to imagine that I was a student's peer and was trying to make some helpful comments pointed toward revision, and that's something that's not necessarily very clear on the handout that I'm going to provide you guys, but it's something that I would also advise. Whenever you are making comments in a peer review situation, make sure to try to make the comments oriented toward what the writer could do in the next step, not just evaluate what's there, not just write this is good or this isn't working very well, but suggest ways in which the writer might revise, okay? Because the part of the point of peer review is you're doing it at a stage when the writer still has time to revise. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. This first comment, okay, this is a summary, so I'm advising the student to put in more explicit citation. Here you'll notice I'm commenting that the first paragraph looks like a pretty good overall statement, but I'm suggesting the writer get a little bit more specific. A little bit later on, you notice, and this has something to do with the grammar, and this is, as the writer will reveal in the last paragraph, an international student, someone who speaks and writes in English as a second or maybe a third language. And so you'll notice if you read through this, and I'll provide this draft as well on Canvas, you'll notice that there's some stuff going on at the level of sentence that makes you think, okay, this person is definitely someone for whom English is not a first language. But you'll notice that I am not marking all of the grammar differences that I see, right? I'm trying to prioritize. And so here this person writes, summarizing the article, her teachers were used the easier words to talk to her, and all her classmates tried to explain all her whats. And I just wasn't clear what that meant. That was confusing. So I marked that. I'm confused by what you mean here. And as a matter of fact, if I'm talking to the student who wrote this, I would probably want to bring that up face to face. Right? And here again, the student uses this term Native American to mean something I don't think she meant, so I'm calling attention to that as well. And then in the last paragraph, again, I return the student's attention to a need to be a bit more specific, because the student makes a claim, a very clear, a pretty stark claim, strong claim, and I just want the student to go back in a future revision and provide some more exemplification for that. So what I hope you can see in these brief comments I made, I'm trying to be constructive. I'm trying to balance praise and criticism, and I'm trying to be specific. So that's what I advise for you guys as well. For your activity that gives you an opportunity to check in, that gives you credit for doing the mini lecture, I'm actually going to fold that into the peer review activity that we do in class on Thursday. So stay alert for that, okay? Good luck finishing your